Your worship, you're live.
Great, thank you. All right, council, I would like to start the regular council meeting of February 14th, 2023 with adoption of the agenda, and I would like to amend that agenda to include a notice of motion from Councillor Cherry under business arising from the minutes and to remove item 11A, staff reports dress code policy. So if someone would like to make that motion for me and second it, please. Councillor Cherry, Councillor Luciano, all in favor? Motion's carried. All right. Adoption of the minutes from the regular council meeting of January 24th, 2023. Someone make that motion for me, please. Councillor Devlin, seconded by Councillor Stapenhurst. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Any business arising from those minutes? So let's go right to Councillor Cherry. Your notice of motion, please.
That increases the business license fees for bed and breakfast and short-term rentals be discussed at the March 16th, 2023 committee of the whole meeting. Some background on this. As council is deeply concerned about the long-term housing in our community, this having a devastating impact on some of our community members, and it restricts the opportunity for local business to recruit and retain employees. In addition, the community feels that business licenses fees should cover the administrative enforcement and compliance costs rather than being downloaded onto the taxpayers.
All right, thank you for that. Any comments on that motion? So the one thing I want to make quite clear, we're going into our fees and charges bylaw here. This doesn't affect that. We're going to move on and we can adopt that fees and charges bylaw, and then we can address this as we move forward and add that or adopt or change at that point in time. Understandable by everyone? All right. Any other business arising? Councillor Palmer? You're muted. You are muted.
Sorry about that. So I understand there's a motion on the table. Is that correct, or is it just a notice at this point?
Just a notice.
So you don't need a second?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Any other business arising from the minutes? Seeing none, going to go right into announcements from the mayor. So just a couple of announcements. I want to say thank you to Evan Parliament. Mr. Parliament has accepted the city's offer to remain our CAO. His contract has been signed and he will be here with us for the next minimum 4 years. So Mr. Parliament, thank you for that. Council is excited to have you on board, and the staff are feeling very comfortable with the stability that you're adding. So thank you for that. Thank you. Appreciate that. Today, as I mentioned earlier, is definitely Valentine's Day. So you know, I used to be in the floral business, so that was a big day for me to smile because everybody was making money. But for those who want to buy Councillor Cherry chocolates or a cake or a drink, it's a special day for him. Happy birthday, Councillor Cherry. I will take that one step further and say it was my birthday yesterday, so you're not left alone feeling older. Because I'm real old and you're still real young. Anyway, happy birthday. And thank you, council, and thank you, staff, for acknowledging these things as we move forward. All right, we're going to move on to 8A, recommendation from committees, the Communication Task Force meeting. Councillor Orlando, do you want to put this motion on the table?
Sure. I move that the Communication Task Force Committee provides support in the recruitment process. This is item 8A, that the Communications Task Force be involved in creating job description of the new communications person, and that council give pre-budget approval for a communications specialist position.
Seconder for that motion, Councillor Palmer, do you want to second that motion? Okay, moved by, seconded by Councillor Palmer. Any discussion? Do you want to elaborate at all, Councillor Orlando or Councillor Palmer?
Yeah, I'm happy to elaborate. So, sort of three separate things here. Number one, we're entering into the budget. We're in the budget process already, so we're trying to get some approval to move ahead with the communications position, because it would take longer if we have to wait until the budget is finally approved. There is funding earmarked for that, held over from last year. And then we're just trying to, with the job description, come up with something a little bit new, a little bit different. So we were hoping to have some involvement with the task force, which includes council and staff in crafting that job description. And the final one is just providing support in the recruitment process, such as sitting in on interviews, that kind of thing, as we seek to select high quality candidate for the position. And that's it. I can answer questions if anyone has them.
Any comments or questions from council? Councillor Cherry.
Thanks, Your Worship. Councillor Orlando, is the goal here to go after one individual or a corporation or business to run this?
I think the discussion's all been focused on the person.
Okay.
All right. Any other comments from council? Councillor Lusso.
Thanks, Mayor Schultz. Would that person be working here in town, or would that person be working remotely for the city?
Yeah, through the chair. I hadn't thought of that, but the assumption is working here.
That would be optimal. That's what we would prefer.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Palmer?
Thank you, Mayor Souls, and thank you to Councillor Orlando for being a driving force behind the communications and moving this forward. Just a cautionary note on pre-budget approval. This is not something we want to get in the habit of, but this has been on the communications has been an issue for a very, very, very long time. And so we note that it's important. Just a little bit further, generally the staff positions is more of an administrative operational thing. But because the communications position is such a critical component of making sure that we as council are getting good messages out, that's why a little bit more involvement by individual councillors to help with formulating this, so that we don't just get another talking head and staff trying to interpret where council's really at. It's such an important piece on how we improve communications in the future. Thank you, Mayor Souls.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other comments or questions from council? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? No, motion's carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to 8B, recommendation from Committee of the Whole of February 9th regarding the draft long-term financial plan. Someone want to put that motion on the table for me, please? Councillor Stapenhurst.
I move that the third reading of the fees and charges amendment bylaw number 2350 be rescinded, and that fees.
No, wrong one.
Sorry.
We're just under 8B, the Committee of the Whole at the City of Revelstoke's draft long-term financial plan. You have that?
No, you can.
Okay, I'll move that forward then, and then you can second it if you want. That the City of Revelstoke's draft long-term 2023-2037 financial plans, as shown in Appendix A, be brought forward to council. Do you want to second that now, Councillor?
I'll second that.
Seconded by Councillor Stapenhurst. Any discussion on that motion? Ms. Moore, any comment?
Through your worship, no, I don't have any comments.
Okay, any questions from council? So we discussed this in the Committee of the Whole, bringing this motion forward to council regarding the long-term draft long-term financial plan. Seeing no comments, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Item number 2. Someone want to put that on? Do you, any of you have that in your in your package. Councillor Devlin.
Move that the financial plans includes the proposed spending packages and the highlights within the financial plans be circulated for public feedback and comment, including increases as follows. Property taxes, 3% increase in 2023, along with 4% and 5% increase scenarios. Garbage rates, 4% increase in 2023. Water user rates, 5% increase in 2023. Big Eddy water user rates, 15% increase in 2023, and sewer user rates and sewer frontage charges, 20% increase in 2023.
Seconder for that motion, please. Councillor Cherry, discussion on the motion. Ms. Moore, any comments?
Through your worship, no, I don't have any further comments.
Okay. Council, any questions or concerns? This is basically bringing this forward, allowing it to go out to the public for input from the community so they can have a look at this. At this point in time, this is not set in stone. This is basically going out to the community saying, this is where our financial situation is. We would like to have some input from you as to what you think and go from there. Any other further comments? And so I've had communication with some of our staff, including some of our firefighters regarding some of this. And so they'll be able to make comment and input regarding how their budget would be affected with that. Councillor Palmer, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Souls. I've had various individuals approach me regarding the taxation and possible increases and then some of the user rates as well. So I just want to make it clear to the public, for anybody that's listening, that this is a time, this is going out for public feedback. This is the time to make sure that you're getting feedback back to council so that we can take any of your concerns in consideration. Thank you, Mayor Souls.
All right, thank you. Any other comments from council? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All those in favor? Opposed? No, motion's carried. Thank you. Item number 3, someone want to put that on the table for me, please? Councilor Lucio.
I move that the financial plans, including the operating capital major project spending packages, be presented for public comment and feedback at the formal public budget consultation session scheduled for February 28th, 2023.
Seconder for that motion, please. Councilor Stapeners. Any discussion on this motion? Again, as Councillor Palmer had said, there's time for feedback. You can make feedback before, but also there'll be that formal public budget consultation session scheduled for the 28th of this month. And you can give feedback at that if you don't get a chance to make feedback prior to, or do both. Any further discussion on this motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion's carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, council. Thank you, Ms. Moore. All right, moving on to item 9A, fees and charges amendment bylaw 2350. Does someone want to put that motion on the table and then we can discuss why this is here? Councilor Cherry.
That third reading of the fees and charges amendment bylaw number 2350 will be rescinded, and that fees and charges amendment number 2350 will be reread a third time as amended.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councilor Devlin. Discussion on the motion. So Ms. Floyd, I'm going to go to you if I can. Somehow we missed part of it.
Thank you, Worship. Yes, so part of the Parks and Rec Schedule E, I believe, was omitted. So we've added that, and then we've also made a couple of changes to specify women's hockey and men's hockey.
Right.
And there were slight increases to the men's hockey.
All right. That means Councilor Cherry and Mr. Parliament have to pay more money?
That's correct.
Yes. And is it, a big amount of money for each one of those two, just those two in the community?
Yes, Your Worship.
Awesome. Okay, then I'm all in support of this. All right. Seeing any other questions or comments regarding fees and charges? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion's carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to zoning amendment bylaw 2022005. So that someone want to put the first one on, please, for me. Councilor Devlin.
I move that zoning amendment bylaw number 2346 be read a second time.
Second for that motion, please. Councillor Lucian. Oh,
Sorry, I'm just trying to
sorry,
step out of the room,
Councillor.
declaring a conflict, I'm recusing myself, related to a business relationship with the applicant.
All right, thank you for that. All right, so that has been moved by Councillor Devlin, seconded by Councillor Lucian. Discussion on the motion. So I am going to go to Mr. Simon. Do you want to weigh in?
Through your worship, staff do have a presentation if you would like us to take a bit of a deeper dive into the specifics of the text amendment. I know there was a committee of the whole meeting from 2 to 3 today talking about the resort more comprehensively. We do have a presentation prepared if you do want us to delve a little bit deeper. Otherwise, happy to answer any questions that council may have.
I think we'd like to see that presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. To your worship, can you see the screen here with the presentation?
We can, thank you.
Excellent. If there's any issues, as always, please feel free to interrupt me. So zone 2022-005, again, is related to an amendment that would seek to permit shifting of density at a capped rate between development areas within the CD8 zone. And as I go through this presentation, I'll do my best to not repeat any information that you guys may have heard in the previous discussion at committee of the whole. So we'll start off with some background, get into details of the proposal, and then conclude with policy direction and the recommendation from staff. So lands intended to be developed for resort purposes were rezoned in 2007. This rezoning identified 10 different development areas, each with prescribed densities. Each area has some unique characteristics, and currently there's no ability to shift density between the areas. So I'll quickly run through how much density is allocated to the different areas shown on the map here. Area 1, you can see quite a large amount of commercial, about 23,000 square meters. And then in addition, about 2,700 dwelling units or hotel units or lodge units, should note. Area 2, pretty minimal, 67 residential, hotel, commercial units, and no actual commercial retail space. Area 3, a little bit of commercial at 1,450 square meters with 200 units prescribed for it. Area 4, only 10 dwelling units. And you can see, that's a pretty large area of land at 56 acres. No commercial is allocated here. Area 5, 40 dwelling units, no commercial allocated. Again, quite a large area of land at about 34 acres. Area 6, 65 dwelling units, no commercial, large area of land. Same story with Area 7, 185 units, no commercial. Area 8, very, very large area of land with significant steep slopes, 385 units dedicated to it with no commercial. Area 9, 270 units, no commercial. And then Area 10 is allocated about 8,500 square meters of commercial with just under 1,300 units. So you can see areas 1 and 10 are allocated the bulk of the density for development at the resort. Now, something else to keep in mind is what uses are permitted where. So it is unique in this zone where we have the area in red here is resort neighborhood, and you can see it accommodates uses such as residential, tourist accommodation, cafes, restaurants, convenience stores, which interestingly enough, even though commercial is allowed as a permitted use, there is no commercial retail space as per the previous slide that's been allocated to it. So that's one of the big challenges that we're running into with this very prescriptive table, which from a planning perspective gives some indications that the table wasn't necessarily vetted through a robust land use planning analysis, because that's one of the big gaps. You allow commercial uses, but then you restrict it in the next breath with a density table that doesn't allow for any commercial. The resort core areas in blue here, areas 1, 9, and 10, they allow for all the above noted uses, but this is where you get the more traditional resort commercial. Equipment sales, retail stores, pubs, equipment sales and repairs, personal and professional service establishments, travel agencies, heli ski facilities, liquor stores. That's what you would expect in core. So with this amendment, there's not a change in the uses that are allowed, but rather proposing more flexibility to allow some of the density to be shifted between the areas. So the amendments looking specifically and it's only looking at shifting density that's prescribed for in area 1. And as a reminder, it's about 23,000 square feet of commercial and about 2,742 units. So you could shift up to 30% of that total from area 1 into a different development area, so long as no more than 15% is reallocated to any one area. So for commercial, that means you could have about 6,700 square meters of commercial space reallocated, with no more than about 3,300 allocated to any one particular area. Now, what does 3,300 square meters of commercial space look like? Give you guys an example. The base camp building next door to City Hall is going to be about 2,500 square meters of commercial. So that starts to give you an idea of what we're actually talking and on the ground development. So the amendment also looks to allow for shifting of residential units or hotel lodge accommodation units. So this would mean no more than 822 units total, again, with that 30% cap, with no more than 15% going to one area. 822 units could be reallocated, with no more than 411 to any one specific development area. There's some other verbiage in the text amendment. So one of the amendments says to ensure that any density transfer is aligned with the intent of the master development agreement, and very important that it's subject to approval of the city. So really important to keep in mind that, yes, this amendment is looking at giving the flexibility to shift some density, some capped density between development areas for a variety of reasons that we'll get into. It's still subject to approval of the city. So that's embedded right in the zoning bylaw. And then in addition, this is more housekeeping, adding in a 7th column to the table in the zoning bylaw so that we have all the totals combined in there. So what are the implications of this? So again, you heard some discussion in the previous conversation that a lot of ground truthing goes in, and you can see just by the numbers that I showed in the previous slide, we're talking large areas of land and some complex geotech environmental constraints. And we want to make sure that those are going to be accounted for. But even when we just do a real high level desktop analysis, say, well, with this amendment, what can we really probably expect in the near future? So areas 2 and 3, they're already supported for golf course development. So as stated by RMR, you might see some snack shacks that are now allowed to be located on golf course lands, which is pretty inconsequential and you think would already be supported there, just to support the golf course operations. Areas 6, 7, and 8, very, very steep slopes, environmentally sensitive land. So you're unlikely to see a huge shift in reallocation of density into these areas. Areas 4 and 5, these are the most likely candidates to receive some additional density. They're relatively flat. They have good access, and they already are in proximity to city services. With more development in areas 4 and 5, future development permit stages when you're really going to get into detailed design. So considerations at this stage would be building height, building siting, conservation-based design, open space preservation, pedestrian connectivity, and engineering requirements, just to name some. And all these would be guided by the principles that are outlined within the official community plan, specifically Appendix 3, which is titled Revelstoke Mountain Resort Development Guidelines. So all development needs to abide by these guidelines. So something else to keep in mind, and this was discussed in the previous presentation, the CD8 lands are in close proximity to a major community amenity, Williamson Lake. Pedestrian access at all stages of development, and I know the resort has been working very closely with the engineering team and the planning team to maintain access to Williamson Lake. This gives you a general overview of the map here of the proposed Valley Trail. And you can see, then again, there's still some work to be done with the engineering group, and Director Black can certainly speak to this if there's questions. But you can see that there is a proposal right now that would see a 0.8 kilometer stretch connecting to through the village down to Turtle Pond, and then ultimately to the south end of Williamson Lake. So moving forward now into how do we evaluate these proposals, and what does the overarching policy framework look like for this development? Really brief kind of policy hierarchy here for council. Local Government Act, Community Charter, that's the stuff that we operate under day in, day out as local government. And then we have the resort that's entered into this master development agreement and prepared a high-level conceptual, originally in 2003, a resort development plan, some updates in 2020, and likely to see some updates in the future. These are the high-level vision, conceptual level plans, and then the MDA being specifically a contract with the province to allow the resort to develop. There are overarching principles and policies that are intended to guide future detailed design stages. You can see the OCP does overlap in there. Again, it is a high-level vision document, but the OCP and the appendix that guides development at RMR does have some pretty specific things when you start delving into it as well. So you can see how it kind of floats between this high-level vision document and then it's used in real time to guide the detailed site planning that's going to happen at development permit, subdivision, and building permit stage. This is when we get into the zoning bylaw, subdivision development and servicing bylaw. We have detailed design, servicing analysis, site planning controls, pedestrian connectivity, environmental preservation. And you can see the hierarchy of the policy here, how once we get to development permit and subdivision stage, it needs to align with the official community plan, which again is going to be aligning in tandem with the resort development plan and master development agreement. So some of the specific policies that are contained within the OCP, and the resort had done a good job at highlighting that the OCP is in pretty decent shape when it comes to alignment with the MDA. So you can see some of the policies that do support, allowing for a flexible development concept as ground truthing occurs. Right now, you go out and you ground truth areas that are identified for residential, and when you do geotech, maybe they're not suitable for any form of development and the lands just need to be preserved in perpetuity. So ground truthing is incredibly important to actually understand what the lands can support. So that's why you see these policies embedded in the OCP, because there was a recognition of that when the OCP was amended in 2009 to incorporate this. So location of bed units within the resort core in different resort neighborhoods should be a flexible concept, generally consistent with the resort development plan. And then comprehensive development zoning that provides some certainty to the developers in the city regarding land use and density, while providing flexibility during build out of the resort. These are two of the policies that are applicable for this development, specifically for the zoning bylaw text amendment that's before council today. As staff have reviewed the proposal, staff are supportive of it, and we are supportive of council granting second reading and proceeding to a public hearing. It allows for greater alignment with the MDA and the OCP, allows the resort to respond to on-the-ground conditions as they do complete more detailed analysis, as well as changes in the market. I think that the previous presentation showed a segment of community housing located at the corner of Airport and Nickel that would be deed restricted, so no short-term rentals. That's something that wouldn't have been envisioned in 2003 as being such a great need for the community. The resort's already building employee housing, and at that time in 2003 to 2009, there wasn't a sense of how much of a housing crunch we would be in. So that's one example of how this amendment could allow some flexibility to adapt to market conditions. That allows flexibility for build out sites or ground truth. Much of the resort lands, as previously indicated, are steep slopes or sensitive environmental areas, require a lot of technical analysis to support development. It allows for more comprehensive planning and development located in buildable areas, as opposed to encroaching into sensitive environmental areas. And that's one of the big concerns from a planning perspective. We get overly prescriptive and we start making density forced to be in a location that hasn't been appropriately ground truthed, then we might start seeing greater pushes under provincial legislation to seek approvals for, reducing streamside protection enhancement areas, for example, under riparian area regulations, because the development's being forced to encroach into these sensitive areas rather than working with the confines of the land as it currently sits. It allows for density to be dispersed across the resort lands and the potential to have a greater compatibility with adjacent development in Arrow Heights. And we can see over the last 8-9 years, Mackenzie Village is a good example about how development in Arrow Heights has changed over time. And you can see we are getting more multi-unit development proposals. This doesn't mean that we want to see 8-story condos immediately adjacent to Arrow Heights, but some well thought out multi-unit housing, some row houses, some duplexes is starting to become the norm in that area, and dispersing density from the resort core allows for more appropriate transitions as you come through Arrow Heights and ultimately enter that core. And in addition to, we don't see a hyper-densification of the resort core, which again could have some negative impacts in terms of creating almost a second downtown, which was discussed in the previous presentation as well. So the more dispersed it is, the more we're not getting that competitive side and rather more complementary sides. It allows for more comprehensive planning to be undertaken. This does give, a little bit of certainty, even though it is still subject to approval of the city at future stages. It does give some certainty for the developer to pull the trigger on, spending what does become, tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars on ground truthing and coming up with detailed site designs to show that there is this intent, even though it's still subject to city approval, there is this intent from the city to recognize that changes might need to happen in terms of where the location goes. So they start to invest to actually ground truth that and come up with detailed site designs. And lastly, again, staff are supportive because the text amendment is still subject to approval from the city when the request does come, or should the request come from the resort. So what happens after, if the text amendment is approved? Development permits are required, specifically for developing within sensitive environmental areas, as well as environmentally hazardous areas. So the whole RMR development area is blanketed as a development permit area. So development permits are needed anytime something is proposed to be built. Continue working with the resort. There's a lot of master planning initiatives that are being undertaken. You're going to see a transportation master plan presented at the next committee of the whole meeting. Socioeconomic impact analysis was discussed in the previous presentation as well. We want to continue working with them to make sure that the impact of the resort is accounted for as the city embarks on master plans to set the stage for how we want to grow over the next 20 years or so. And then continue working with them on more comprehensive planning as we see proposals come forward. So more detailed site planning and analysis, community engagement, a review of the provisions within the OCP. There is an action item that's noted in the staff report in the OCP to want to revisit those policies and clauses within Appendix 3 that guide development at the resort. Make sure that we're still responding to the needs of the community and how this resort integrates with the city as a whole. It was discussed previously as well, CD8 zone amendments for a potential rewrite that may be needed. And then as well, we want to work with the resort to review whatever legal agreements or other tools there are to provide greater certainty to the community, the developer, and the city regarding any obligations and what we can expect as this development does progress into the future. So again, the staff recommendation is that the bylaw be read a second time and that a public hearing be scheduled for March 14th. There are some alternative options. So council may provide alternative direction. This could be more information from staff or the proponent to be brought forward at a later date, or requested changes to the actual amending bylaw. So if council is uncomfortable with, let's say, a 30% reallocation and they'd be more comfortable with the 20%, we can provide some information on what those numbers look like. So that is one of the options that council has. And then the other option, if council says, we don't think that density should be shifted at all, and you got to work with what you have. Again, from staff's perspective, that's a very challenging scenario to work under, but that is something that is an option of council to deny the bylaw. So that does conclude my presentation, and staff are here, and I believe the proponent is still in the room as well, should there be any questions.
Great, thank you, Mr. Simon, I appreciate that. So I am going to go to council. Is there any questions from council regarding the motion on the table? Reading this zoning amendment bylaw for a second time. Councilor Cherry.
Thanks, Your Worship. Through to Mr. Simon, has there been any public consultation yet on this?
Through Your Worship to Councilor Cherry, no public consultation. The public consultation with this application would be in the form of a public hearing.
Okay, has there been anybody else consulted?
Through Your Worship to Councilor Cherry, we do send out the file for internal and external agency referral. And you will see in the staff report, there's a section in there that talks about, I believe it's titled socioeconomic implications, and that was working internally with our community economic development group as well as our finance department. So that's reflective of some of the comments that you saw from them in regards to future master planning.
And with the presentation that we just saw, we know the mountain resort development people.
Yes.
Thanks.
Any other comments, Councilor Staphenhurst?
Quick question. When I reference some of the documents that were provided to us, one of them is the environmental management plan. That was dated back in 2003. How often will we update that, and would the current changes dictate a new environmental management plan?
Mr. Simon?
Through your worship, Councillor Stapenhurst, I just want to confirm, are you referring to the environmental management plan that would have been appended to the master development agreement or done in support of the master development agreement rather?
That through the chair, yes.
That's correct.
Through your worship, so that would be a process with the province, and the province may require certain updates. Whenever we have a development permit application, the entire RMR development area is blanketed as an environmentally sensitive area. So they need registered biologists anytime a shovel is in the ground to say that what is being undertaken is being done in accordance with best practices for environmental management, in accordance with provincial regulations, riparian area assessment, Water Sustainability Act, Migratory Birds Act, all of that good stuff. So it's always overseen by professionals, and those professionals are involved early on to make sure that designs are done in a way that works with the environmental features. And that's something that we've had a lot of good discussions with the resort about.
Follow up, Councillor?
No, thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Councillor Palmer, do you have any questions?
Thank you, Mayor Solis. And thank you, Mr. Simon, for the presentation. It's the second time I've seen it, and I think I learned a little bit more, even though I've read over it several times. A question to Mr. Simon. On your slide shots that you did this time, were they enhanced from back last year with the previous council?
Through your worship, yes, I added a little bit more context into it, I think, to give some better background, so showing exactly how the density is currently allocated.
Yeah, thank you. That was really, really helpful. I think that really helped sort of clarify in my mind. Mayor Sol, and council, this is something that's really been weighing on my mind for some time. With the previous council, did do the direction to have us come to a committee of the whole, so there was more information. I am disappointed in that we only had 1 hour just before this meeting, so I am feeling like I'm being pressured and almost coerced into having to make a decision, and I'm disappointed about that. Certainly, Mr. Simon's second option of having more information. I am not opposed to the density shifts, but I am not understanding. I'm not in a place that I'm comfortable enough for saying this is right. So if we talk about 20%, 25%, 30%, and then on the environmental aspects, the other thing that I'm not comfortable on behalf of the community is on those corridors. So not just the traditional corridors where you go work through on development permits and get, but those assets in our community, we've been losing them repetitively by developments of natural corridors, and then the sense, not just the artificial kind of concept of where we're going through communities, but where are real values. So for example, when we look at the sections 4 and 5, what's the connectivity to Williamson Lake so that we're getting off roadways? And there's been dialogue, good statements, but I'm not getting the confidence that we're addressing them adequately. Really, I would like to continue what we started with the committee of the whole. There was, I think we were starting to get into some more detail. There's some of the, at the committee of the whole, the developer was showing some concept plans of on sections 4 and 5 where they want more density, and probably really makes sense. But when I was looking at it, it looked like sort of traditional, type of subdivisions, instead of saying, well, how do we create the density that makes, minimizes impacts on green spaces and movement of people. I heard lots of good things in the committee of the whole, especially on, ways of getting transportation, so that, one of the phrases I heard was, how do we get it so that even the rich people don't drive to the resort, that there's better connectivity. And those are maybe not directly related to the density, but it's having this sort of understanding where we're going, and not just a short term, when I say short term, several year, win on the development potential on a particular parcel and going ahead. The other point that I would make Again, Mr. Simon did a great presentation there. However, when I look back to the original work and the amount of documentation, and when I've talked to some of the old timers that were here when some of those dialogue that was happening, whether this was going to be within the city, whether there was a boundary expansion, that I don't think that there was necessarily a lot of errors in the mindset. And I'm hearing that, you know, we don't understand why that is. And I want to understand, because if it should just be a blanket right across the whole thing, well, then that's, you know, one thing. But really, whenever we're looking at zoning amendments, density, we do that very, very often, and they are in small little sections. And so it feels like to me that really the motivation here of, you know, sort of I'm feeling pressure to maybe make decisions that aren't going to be in the long-term interests of the community, not so much on the density, but on how that density is done. And it seems to me that, okay, here's I think in the committee of the whole, there was the statement, here's the low-hanging fruit for development potential. We understand the housing market, there's in that's great, but how do we make sure we do that right and making sure we do get the protections for the community? Williamson Lake certainly is a key component, even though 4 and 5 aren't directly adjacent. You know, how does that connectivity happen in the future and right up to the resort? So those are just some general comments. Again, I'm not necessarily opposed to the density shift, but I am very reluctant at this point because I feel that I don't have enough information. I haven't had enough ability to vet through the information. I would like to have the slide set from the committee of the whole that was just finished, so that I can now look at it, because we didn't have that in advance, which we normally have, and I think are required to have, quite frankly. I would like to continue that dialogue with the community, though, with the development, whether that's in a council meeting or with the committee of the whole. So those are my comments at this point. Thank you, Mayor Souls.
Mr. Simon, you have a follow-up.
Through your worship, sorry, and I don't mean to interject here. I just do want to point out, because it isn't noted in the staff report, because again, these policies aren't necessarily applicable for the purpose of the scope of the text amendment. But specifically with Williamson Lake, there are 2 policies, and I was just jotting them down here, 5.3.6 and 5.5.4 contained within Appendix 3 of the OCP that do speak towards Williamson Lake, pedestrian connectivity, and ensuring that recreational cultural activities, enhancing and not negatively impacting existing recreational activities that happen within those areas. So Williamson Lake, Turtle Pond, and Lock Creek are some of the 3 big ones that are outlined in the OCP. And the only reason I bring that up, and in addition, the recently adopted Parks and Recreation Master Plan has some verbiage in there, just to inform council that these are the policies that are used to evaluate future applications, development permits. So we do have that enshrined in the OCP. And as has kind of previously been alluded to, the OCP itself does have a lot of very pointed principles and policies that we are required to evaluate at development permit stage. So the OCP does have quite a bit of strength to it, I would say. Just again, not sure, Councillor Palmer, if that adds a little bit of context to the nature of the conversation. I know it's a little bit outside the scope of the text amendment itself, but I just want to make sure that council's aware that the OCP does include some policies for protection and preservation.
Councillor Palmer, you have follow-up.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Souls. And actually, that's really helpful for me, because it reinforces that I need more information before making these kind of decisions. So it's helpful, you know, and I think those are the community values, certainly from the constituents that are regularly talking with me, that those are the values that are super, super important. And I want to make sure we get that right before giving a zoning, you know, basically a zoning amendment entitlements. Thank you, Mayor Souls.
Great, thanks. Any other comment, Councillor Staples?
Yeah, I just want to say that, I think Councilor Palmer raises some excellent points, and I just want to know what he would propose in order to be more comfortable. I think the timing of the two meetings going back to back, I think it is a little bit much, but if there's something that he proposes that we do, then, what's the direction that he thinks we should take?
So I'll let you make comments, Councillor Palmer, and then I'm going to weigh in.
Yeah, Mayor Souls, I would really like to have another session with the developer. I know a lot of council did have an unofficial meeting, I guess, with the developers earlier that I wasn't able to attend. But I think if we could carry on with that discussion that we had at the committee of the whole, I think it's super important for the community. I could not make this decision right now in good conscience on behalf of the community. And so understanding that, having questions sort of vetted through in more detail, and I need time to digest the material that was presented. So I would suggest, either a committee of the whole or a special committee of the whole or a council meeting. I'd be open to any of those aspects. We've got a lot of stuff to go on the go right now, but we've got through the main part of the budget. So I think we have some time availability to do that.
All right, thanks for your comment. Do you have a follow-up, Councillor?
No, thank you, sir.
So I'm going to weigh in here. I think we've got enough information on the table to read a second time. Reading a second time just allows us to go out to the public, for the public to weigh in, and it gives us another chance for us to make comments ourselves, to understand a little better as to what the resort's trying to do. We'll be able to give some more thorough thought to that before it gets read a third time. But you're able to actually engage with RMR. My understanding for a public hearing, and so Mr. Simon, I'm going to go to you, is that we can actually see this slide form maybe on large placards, or have this presentation again, and weigh in from the community. But in the meantime, maybe we can have this conversation either in a special committee of the whole to weigh this stuff and discuss it to better understand it. So comment from you, Mr. Simon.
Through your worship, if I'm just understanding the request specifically, if we do move forward to a public hearing, staff prepare a public information binder that is available here at the City Hall office. We do have staff reports in there, copies of previous presentations, APC reports, minutes, all that would go into the public information binder so that people are aware in advance of the hearing and can get all the information they need. And most certainly, I don't mind doing presentations, so very happy to give another presentation at a public hearing to kind of reiterate the information that was provided today for the public so that they have that benefit.
All right, thank you for that. Councillor Palmer, you have a follow-up.
Thank you, Mayor Souls. Again, I cannot in good conscience proceed to a second reading, and quite frankly, I guess when I look at this is the kind of thing that the public hates. We march through and we give the rhetoric that, okay, yeah, you're going to have your opportunity to speak later on, but then it's marching down and decisions are already made. I do not have enough information to make a good decision to go to the next step. I do not have that confidence. And I think it would be unfortunate if we do march ahead. It's up to council as a whole. However, I think it would be unfortunate because it's already setting a tone that doesn't sit well with me and does not sit well with some of the constituents that I work with, because I do not understand it well enough. And making sure that I protect the natural amenities within our community that many people have told me, whether it's in Arrow Heights, in Big Eddy, some of the areas around recent developments around, that we've lost natural pedestrian corridors, we've lost green space, and we're continuing to do that. And I cannot support where we're going. I think there has to be better understanding where we're going as a community. And we can use, using the buzzword of today, the ground truthing. I need more ground truthing before I proceed.
All right, thanks for your comment. I appreciate that. We've had this come twice to council for second reading. I think there's information in there. I'm hearing what you're hearing, so council, what we're hearing in the community, at least what I'm hearing in the community, is three separate things. Protection of Williamson Lake, it's the entity of the community. It's been here for years, and when I hear Councillor Palmer talk about the old timers, I'm going to think he's saying about those who've been here for a long time, not in age. So I'm gonna look at that, because my family's been here, my wife's family's been here for the better part of the last 130 years. And so Williamson Lake is an important entity that needs to be protected. And so what I'm seeing here is we have property around Williamson Lake, but also we need to make sure that there's some connectivity around Williamson Lake. So however that can legally be done with a golf course, but when I look at it is, I'm hearing from the community, we want to have the ability to have a pathway through that golf course around the lake and connect up to the resort, whether that's a formal trail, an informal trail, or whatever. Those are things that need to be. And then thirdly, that housing concept on basically McKinnon Road and Airport Way is something that's important. But Councillor Cherry, you've got another one that you want to bring up.
No, I was just gonna, I didn't mean to interrupt, sorry, Your Worship.
No, that's fine.
This has been in front of council twice, us once. We just had a committee of the whole meeting. It's also been in front of the APC, and their comments have been made to push this through. We're only talking about a second reading before having a public hearing.
Right.
I think we're all getting the same emails from the community. So just wanted to.
Any other follow-up from other councillors?
I just want to echo the concern that I've been hearing from the community in regards to, protecting our natural resources, protecting that amenity of Williamson Lake. I don't, I think, like, yes, we've gotten some information. I think Councillor Palmer raises some excellent questions in regards to, wanting more information, what that specifically is. I'm not sure, possibly time will tell. There's been some environmental concerns, some impacts on that area that I think, personally I'd like to see addressed, or maybe have a little bit more time to dive into and figure out what was causing the algae that we saw in Williamson Lake over the past summer or two.
So I'm going to go to Mr. Black on that. We're going to speak to that right now. Okay, Mr. Black.
Thank you, Your Worship. Last year, it was noticed that the color had changed at Williamson Lake. Early summer. It was first noted that it might be an algal bloom. It was not. It was just due to glacial runoff, and we had a high late rainfall, late snow melt last year, and that was the cause of that.
Through the freshets.
It was freshet, and so there was no algal bloom. I know the community had originally been noted that could be the case. Testing was negative.
Okay.
In addition, and I'm sorry, Your Worship, if I might, the Williamson Lake seems to be a separate entity to this discussion, a very important entity. It's almost as if staff should be coming to council with a plan, a strategic plan to enhance, protect, and look at opportunities for that specifically. I know it is one of the council's strategic goals for this year. I do not, and this is my personal opinion, I do not believe that this text amendment plays into Williamson Lake in particular. In my opinion, it would be if council so directs staff to come forward with a plan to budget and figure out what the best way to ensure that connectivity is with trails, working with the future transportation master plan that's coming, the parks and rec transportation plan for all the sanctioned and unsanctioned trails, usage for the campground, the valley trail connection that the mountain has. That may be a direction that council would direct staff that we could come back to and work as a single project to ensure that that is protected as the community has spoken. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Follow up, Councillor Stevens.
No, I like what Mr. Black has suggested in regards to protecting that trail network, and maybe we could have a better understanding of how, you know, we can work alongside, but I don't think right now the information that's been presented, clearly paints that picture on how to best proceed, and managing everybody's, best interest.
All right, so I'm gonna go around the table one more time, just with the proposal that's on the table now is the second reading. Any further comment on that second reading, Councillor Lucio?
Thank you, Mayor Schultz. Just a question for Mr. Simon. When we talk about the density shift, with commercial and residential, those are two separate numbers. They wouldn't move together. You'd be able to shift just residential or just commercial into a zone?
Through your worship to Councillor Lucio, yes, that is correct. They would be separate considerations.
Thank you very much. I just have a question for the proponents, Peter or Jason. How many bed units do you guys have available to build with uphill infrastructure after your Heli hotel and staff accommodations that you were constructing right now?
So I will allow that question to go because I asked the proponents to stay. So any comment, Mr. Kelder?
I think we're at somewhere in the neighborhood of 800 bed units to date. And the earned entitlements, the investments made on Mountain at the build out of the master development being agreement between the province and the developers, evidence in the OCP is 16,600 spread out throughout the development lands. That requires a bunch more infrastructure on Mountain in terms of investment, but we're so far away from what that would be. Now, in context, Mackenzie Village is 1,400 units, which is times 4, 5,600 bed units, as an example.
Yes.
Follow-up, Council.
I was just wondering if, when we're talking about this text amendment and the shift of density, if there can be provisions to allow a shift of density to zone 5, and then once development has been approved, allow a shift of density into zone 4.
And so I want to just weigh in with that, but I'm going to go to Mr. Simon before I go to Mr. Kelder, because this is where the ground truthing comes in. You can give the density shift, but if they start doing geotechnical and it says, no, we can't build anything in there, then they're going to have to shift that from somewhere else. But I just would like Mr. Simon to weigh in to confirm that, please.
Through your worship, and I guess to all of council, certainly council can direct changes to the bylaw. And it's important if you want to direct changes to those bylaws that it's considered before public hearing, or else you're going to have to hold another public hearing after, which is okay. That can be done. The text amendment could be changed so that it's only applicable to area 5 or only applicable to area 4 and 5, perhaps. But with that, I just would caution, maybe this is where the proponent can add in as well. We are considering what has been applied for. So usually staff kind of work with the proponent to bring something forward that aligns with policy. There's a bit of back and forth to get it in a presentable form to council so that it's something that does align and can be supported. So I just want to make sure that we're not going down a path that isn't going to work for the proponent's plans, because again, this is an applicant driven application.
Kelder, would you like to weigh in?
Sure, Your Worship. I would functionally, the zoning bylaw has to be compliant with the OCP. And the application in front of you today is something to try and bring the zoning bylaw, which is inconsistent with the policy in the OCP today. All of those other environmental goals, connectivity goals in the OCP are also layered on top of that. But currently, the flexibility contemplated in the OCP is not evidenced in the zoning bylaw. That is the purpose for this application, is basically an administrative catch-up of the zoning bylaw. It's just inconsistent with the OCP. It is not, if council were to propose changes to the zoning bylaw that were inconsistent with the OCP, I'd probably rely on Mr. Simon or Mrs. Floyd, but it's not, the Local Government Act doesn't really allow for that. Zoning bylaws must be compliant. And that's candidly the intent of the application is some housekeeping. It's text housekeeping to make the zoning bylaw more, match up a little bit better with the OCP. And that was the discussion at the APC, and that was why their recommendation is positive. And that's why we worked through it with staff and the way the text is written over the last approximately 12 months. That's we're not suggesting any policy change to the OCP that would restrict the environmental controls, pedestrian access, etc. So that is the narrow focus of the application, is an administrative text update. And Mr. Simon can confirm, this is actually technically an area where it's not required for a public hearing in the province of BC. So that is the way the province and the Local Government Act work, is they expect the municipality to have a local government act, expects an OCP to be adopted that complies with the regional growth strategy, and the zoning bylaw falls in underneath. All we're trying to do is get that a little bit more underneath. That is the purpose of the application, Your Worship.
Thank you for your comment. Follow up, Councilor.
No, thank you.
Councilor Palmer, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Mayor Souls. I'll say, like, I have a lot of questions for the developer. I don't think it's appropriate right here, and I think it would be appropriate in another meeting. But so I'll just do a question to Mr. Simon, if I may, Mayor Souls. Is this application simply an administrative adjustment to adjust errors in the zoning to comply with the OCP? That's what I'm hearing? I just want confirmation from the planner on that. Or is that something that we should have a dialogue later on? That might be a good way to address that, because I have concerns about that.
Through your worship to Councillor Palmer, it is my professional view that the amendment does make the zoning bylaw more consistent with the official community plan right now. And this is what happens over time. You get bylaws and they start changing, and there's some inconsistency with your higher level plans. This is not uncommon. This is certainly what I would view as a pragmatic step in the right direction to start to see this specific zone, which is a very important zone, in greater alignment with the OCP. And if I had to indicate a comfort level with one of the two documents as it relates to development at the resort, the OCP is certainly in more appropriate form than the CD8 zone. So this amendment gets the CD8 zone a little bit closer in alignment with the OCP, which is certainly a stronger document.
Follow up, Councilor.
Thank you, Mayor Souls. This dialogue where it's going right now isn't helping me. It really isn't helping me. And it's feeling a little adversarial. I think that's unfortunate. I really would like to be working with the resort and making sure that I'm working on behalf of the constituents and making sure Revelstoke's values that are reflected appropriately in the zoning process. And if there's if the current zoning is inconsistent, I'm not talking about these sort of levels, then I think that's a whole nother dialogue that I certainly don't understand well enough. I'll reiterate, I would almost put a motion on the table, Mayor Souls, for continuing on at the committee of the whole. I think that would be helpful for us on the decision making. I think at least one of the other councillors is aligning with what I'm thinking. So there's already some, I think there's enough questions in if there's a rush, why are we being rushed? I ask that, and I would like to put a motion on the table potentially, but I would really like to see that we're consistent, they're collaborative in this whole process. I am not trying to be adversarial. I am not against density increases in the zones of 4 and 5. I think it's probably appropriate, but I don't think I'm getting enough information at this point. Thank you, Mayor Souls.
Any other comments on the motion on the table?
Did Councilor Palmer make a motion to?
No, we got a motion on the table. We have to deal with this first, and then he can make a motion.
That was my question.
Okay.
Thank you.
So the motion on the table, Councilor Palmer.
Yeah, so there is the motion is on the table right now. Sorry, it's been a little bit of a discussion, so it's already on the table.
do you mean by that? The second readings on the table or?
Yeah, just confirming. Who made the motion?
Councillor Devlin and seconded by Councillor Lucio.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any further discussion on the motion on the table to go to second reading or have it read a second time? Seeing no other.
Mayor Souls? Mayor Souls, if I may?
Councillor
I'm going to put thank you, Mayor Souls. I'd like to put a motion to table this motion pending another committee whole discussion with the proponent.
There's seconder for that motion. Councillor Stapenhurst. So when you get a motion tabled, that means there's no further discussion on that motion. It gets tabled. Is that correct, Ms. Floyd?
No, your worship, you can discuss the tabling motion, but not the previous motion.
Okay, so let's discuss the tabling motion.
A point of order.
Homer, I'll go to you first and then I'll go around the table.
Yeah, it's always tricky when we do these little things and I was trying to avoid it. But so the tabling motion, I believe, is a non-debatable motion, but that we do vote on, but I'm not 100% sure of that. But I think it's non-debatable.
Okay, I'm just going to confirm that.
You're saying no. Cindy?
I am not 100% sure.
Okay, it's too important. Let's look into it.
Yeah.
Okay, give us a moment.
Yeah, it's too important.
I would guess that Tim knows. Not debatable.
It's not debatable, which means that we're going to vote on this motion. So this motion on the table now is to table this motion to another date. So we're not going to go back to the second reading. If this motion, tabling motion, gets defeated, then we go back to reading the second time and you get to vote on that. So with this that's here, I'm going to ask you all in favor of tabling the motion. So I have 3 in favor. So we got Councillor Lucio, Councillor Palmer, Councillor Stapenhurst in favor, opposed to motioning the table. So we have 3 opposed to motioning or to this. So this is defeated, correct? All right. So now we're going back to the second reading. So the motion on the table is to read this text amendment for a second time. So any question about that? Pretty straightforward. All those in favor of reading this motion a second time? Councillor Palmer, you had a comment?
Yeah, I had a comment before that. So just a statement that I would have liked it tabled, but that was defeated. So I respect that decision. I won't be able to support the motion as it is. I would recommend that it be defeated.
All right, so we're going to now call those in support of second reading. All those in favor? Note that Councillor Cherry, Councillor Devlin, and Mayor Sulz are in favor of this motion. Those who are opposed, Councillor Stapenhurst, Councillor Lucio, Councillor Palmer are opposed. This motion is defeated. Is that correct? All right, so there's no need to go on. So at this point in time, do you want to make another motion so that we have this come to committee of the whole for further discussion?
Point of order, Mayor Souls.
Okay, go ahead.
That's, I really was trying to avoid that, but really we've defeated this, so it's dead.
Okay, so I can bring this back.
So I think that's something for administration to.
Yeah, I'll discuss it with administration. All right, thank you. All right, we're going to move on to item 11B, janitorial contracts. Someone want to put this motion on the table for me, please? Councilor Devlin.
Move that the janitorial contracts for the Public Works Facility, City Hall, and Council Chamber, and public washrooms and class shelters be awarded to Apex Janitorial Services, Inc., and that the mayor and corporate officer be authorized to sign.
Seconder for that motion, please. Councillor Stapenhurst. Any discussion on that motion? Councilor Lucio.
Should we bring Councilor?
Oh, yes, thank you for that. Yeah, appreciate that. We're just gonna bring Councilor Orlando back. Do you have a question, Councilor Palmer? You have your hand up.
Yeah, so just a question on the, it feels a little operational, is it falling into the, just a question whether it's falling in the purchasing policy that we're approving this, or is it, I'm just wondering if this kind of thing really needs to come before council.
I think it's only coming to council because it was deferred or it was given to another contractor and they weren't able to fulfill it. So now it's coming back to council. That's the reason.
Okay, thanks.
All right, so I will ask one more time because we now have Councillor Orlando back at the table. Councillor Devlin, could you read this again if you wouldn't mind?
Certainly
please?
can. I move that the janitorial contracts with Public Works Facilities, City Hall and Council Chamber and the public washrooms and bus shelters be awarded to Apex Janitorial Services, Inc. and that the mayor and corporate officer be authorized to sign the contracts.
And Councillor Lucio has seconded that motion. Any discussion on that motion at this point? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to item 11C, Isabel Corsier project. Someone want to put that on the table? Councillor Orlando.
Your worship, I'm not gonna put it on the table, it's ready to do this to you, but hummed and hawed on this one, but I'm going to declare a conflict on this particular one. As it relates to a business relationship. Yeah, it's kind of borderline for me, but I think I might as well for the time being.
All right.
Oh, boy.
Councillor Stapleton, you had your hand up. Could you read this, please?
Yes, sir. That $5,000 from the Public Art Reserves Fund be allocated to the Art Revelstokes to help offset the cost of the Isabel Corsier statue.
Seconder for that motion, please. Everybody wants to second. Councillor Cherry. All right, Mr. Nato, you're here. Is there anything that you would like to state for this motion?
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't think so. I am just here to answer any questions if council has any.
All right. Any questions, councillors? Councillor Stapleton?
Just a quick question. I really support like the local art downtown. I think it really sets us aside from other communities. I would just like to make maybe the comment that we allocate some of the staff from Public Works to help maintain the snow around these statues, because I hate to see these investments just kind of sitting in snow for 4 months or 2 months or a month out of the year, whatever it's been this year. So that's my only comment. Thank you.
Thanks. Appreciate that comment. Any other comments regarding this motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Let's bring in our Councillor Orlando.
Sorry, I'm not man this last.
Okay, this is Parks, Recreation and Culture. This is regarding the strategy for the arena engagement project. Someone want to put item number 1 on the table for me so we can discuss this, please. Councillor Luciano.
I move that staff be authorized to engage the services of the Tavola Strategy Group for the purpose of developing a communication and engagement strategy around the arena project.
Seconder for that motion, please. Councillor Devlin. Discussion on the motion. Any questions for Mr. Nato or Mr. Black regarding this? So Mr. Nato, this is the group that's best to engage regarding this arena project. Is that correct?
Through Your Worship, yes, we've had some initial conversations with this consultant and feel that she has the qualifications and has been through similar projects. So we feel she would be a good resource for staff in helping initiate this communication strategy.
All right. Any further questions for Mr. Nato on the motion on the table? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? No, motion's carried. Move on to number 2, please. Someone want to make that motion for me? Councillor Stapleton.
That pre-budget approval be be granted to a maximum of 30,000 for fees associated with work to be completed by Arena Communication Consultant to Vola Strategy Group.
Second for the motion. Councillor Devlin. Any discussion on this motion? Councillor Lano.
Your worship, I'm going to vote against it, largely because I think the cost is too much.
All right. Any other comments, questions from council? Mr. Nato, with that statement, how do you feel with this pre-budget approval, 30K for this work? I don't mean to put you on the spot, I'm just curious. Is this kind of an average thing?
Through your worship, I'll defer to.
Mr. Black wants that, he's chomping at the bit to answer, let's let him.
To your worship, to all of council, given that the minimum project cost for this is in the order of 20 to multiples of 20 millions of dollars, $30,000 to engage a consultant is entirely reasonable at this stage. The engineering and design fees alone for this are going to be on the order of $3 million. It's in our best interest to engage a consultant for this service because of the magnitude of this project.
All right, thank you for that, Councilor Palmer. You're muted.
Sorry about that again. Yeah, I was interested in Councillor Orlando's comments on that. You know, I'd looked at it and I sort of had that gut reaction as well of $30,000, though that seems steep. I guess it somewhat begs the question of what's actually, you know, included in the process of that. So, you know, when we're talking about communications, we've got a communications director that we've done some pre-budget stuff with as well. I'm wondering on the timing of this. You know, when does this consultant start if we approve this? And we're wanting to make some good headway. Council's done some really good work on some strategy and sort of our priorities, strategic priorities for our term. So we don't want to be, holding back on getting things done. But at the same time, is there an urgency? And I'm contemplating another tabling motion. Sorry, Your Worship. Of putting this to the communications committee on Friday. But I was just wondering, do we already know the scope of work and did we have some competitive bids on this?
Mr. Nato, you care to weigh in?
Through your worship, the consultant is prepared to start tomorrow if this is approved tonight. We did not go through a competitive bid process. We worked with a consultant that we had already engaged in conversations with a while ago about the project. The intent was to start the community engagement process during the Cyclone Taylor Cup. Because there's a lot of activity happening in the community, we thought it would be a good opportunity to coincide this discussion with that event. That is the only urgent reason we would need to do this today. If council thought that they wanted to look at a different time frame for the community engagement process, we could certainly have more conversation about that. We did obtain a scope of work from the consultant, and both Mr. Black and I reviewed it and thought it was adequate for moving this project forward in conversations with the community. So I will leave it at that, and it will be at council's discretion in terms of timing the communication engagement strategy.
Councilor Orlando, then Councilor Palmer.
Through the chair, I'm wondering why does the consultation need to happen during the Cyclone Taylor Cup tournament? And my second part of that question is, as we look at what kind of facility we're going to build, what we're going to include, if we're going to build a facility, is there not a concern that consulting when there's a lot of visiting hockey players in town will skew our feedback that we get from the community? Should we not be focusing on what the community wants? That's my question.
Okay, so any comment, Mr. Nato, regarding that? And then I'll go to Council Palmer.
Your worship, I think it could go both ways. We did have that conversation. If council feels it would be more appropriate to consult after the Cyclone Taylor Cup, we could totally do that as well. I just figured that at that time, there would have been a lot of interest in what was happening at the facility in terms of getting the community to really participate in the engagement process. But yeah, we can definitely look at restructuring the timelines and maybe do it in the fall in September when the facility's starting back up again. I think it is important to have it while the facility is open rather than during the closure period from April to the end of August when nothing is happening in the facility. I don't think it reflects well in terms of engaging with the community. The intent would be to be at the facility during that week and have conversations with people that are using the facility or spectators that are there to view the event.
Great, thanks for that comment. Council Palmer.
Thank you, Mayor Souls. Having listened to the discussion, I will vote in favor of the motion. I do want to get this going. The Cyclone Cup was a discussion that we had, I can't remember who or all the context, but of saying, well, that would be a good opportunity because there's a tension. And certainly, I think if anything, that will draw out those other users and other people that have other concerns. And that's just kind of like a kickoff point. So with the consultant ready to start tomorrow, and then we can get moving on and making some headway as collectively as council. I guess one of the things with the fees that I count on the staff and confident staff will make sure that we're getting good value on an ongoing basis and that it's not just turning into a fluff consulting kind of thing. This is a priority for council moving ahead, and even the communications piece. If we leave this until later on, we're just going to be losing so much traction. So I'll vote in support of the motion. Thank you, Mayor Souls.
Thanks for the comment. Any other comments on the motion on the table? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Note that Councillor Orlando is opposed. Balance of council is in favor. This motion passes. Item number 3. Someone want to put that on the table for me, please? Councillor Devlin.
Move that additional funds in the amount of $130,000 be included in the 2023 capital budget to enable procurement of architectural renderings, engineering work, and associated design work once the preferred option is selected for the arena project, and that the budget of $160,000 for the arena project be funded within existing 2023 capital budget allocations through savings from other capital projects in the 2023 financial plan.
All right, seconder, Councillor Cherry. Discussion on this motion. Councillor Devlin.
When we say savings through other capital projects in 2023 financial plan, are we talking about altering the financial plan as we saw it the other day to make this $160,000? Is it cutting different capital budget things that we might have already looked at?
There's more comments.
Through your worship, we would work with the existing capital plan to fit it in without having any further tax implications to the residents.
Does that answer your question? Any other questions or concerns? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. All right, let's move on to the water master plan. Someone want to put this motion on the table for me, please? Councilor Lucille.
I move that the water master plan prepared by WSP Consultants dated December 23rd, 2022 be utilized by staff to support the development of long-term capital planning and budgeting for the city's water utilities, citywide and Big Eddy, including the updates to the development cost charges bylaw.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Devlin. Mr. Black, you have a comment.
Your worship and council, I do have a presentation. Should you like to see it?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Mr. Zoe, thank you. So water master plan. Of the multiple master plans that the city staff have been working on the last couple of years, we're down to the last two. I'm sorry, the last three. This is the one of the larger ones. We now have an idea of how the city is going to support growth for the next 20 years and consistent with the OCP that was recently committed. Ms. Rousseau, next, please. So we have a base population of about 8,500 residents. Base population, that does not include the shadow population that we all know exists here. We have two separate water systems, the Big Eddy, one side of the river and the other side of the river. Sources are wells in the Big Eddy and Greeley Creek water treatment plant in Greeley Creek, about 8 kilometers to the east. And we have some wells at the golf course that provide supplemental water in the future. Next slide, please. So the Big Eddy, we recently went through a local area service to refinance and finance that new water system. So we don't anticipate any additional expenditures except for minor expenditures in the Big Eddy for the next 20 years. Capacity is almost 19 liters a second and our demand is around 14. So we do have around 25% flexibility in supply in that area. The water is chlorinated and treated. So Big Eddy is pretty much a standalone. Next slide, please. And this is basically what it is. A well, a tank, and it feeds the residents. Next slide, please. The Revelstoke water system is basically, I'm sorry, I use basically a little too much sometimes. The Revelstoke water system is supplied by the Greeley Creek watershed, which is 8 kilometers to the east of us. The water treatment plant is built up there. Next slide, please. Was built in the 90s and commissioned in 99, 2000. It has a capacity of 175 liters a second, and we can expand it to gain another 25 liters a second should that need become necessary. Next slide. So sorry about this is a picture on my wall that I took a picture with my camera, sorry. However, the Greeley Creek treatment plant, this goes through the Adventureland at Greeley Creek and it follows the highway into town. It's 8 kilometers of 450 millimeter transmission main, and it basically follows Highway 1 all the way to town. Next slide. So we have 3 reservoirs in town. The Highway 1 reservoir, which is between Townley and Victoria. Arrow Heights Reservoir up above Arrow Heights. And RMR will be building us a new reservoir this coming summer to provide water supply for their expansion plans and fire protection. We have 3 booster stations in town, 1 to get water to the Arrow Heights Reservoir, 1 to get to the Monashee booster would be the one that will pump water to the new RMR reservoir. And we have the pumps at the golf course. Next slide, please. So this is basically a schematic. See, I did it again, sorry. Remind me, basically, I've got to stop. This is a schematic of our system. Intake, Big Eddy, golf course wells, PRVs. So as you go down in elevation, the water pressure gets higher and higher. So we have to lower the pressure so you don't burst your
Pressure regulating valve?
PRVs. Okay. Yeah. Pumps, Arrow Heights Reservoir, future or existing boosters at RMR for now. 7 pressure zones. Next slide, please. So what did we do to get to a master plan? We looked at the OCP. We looked at our subdivision and servicing bylaw, which has requirements for the amount of water utilized by each person. Reviewed our reservoir capacities, capacity of our sources, fire protection, 1/3 of all of the storage that is required in our system. So for an industrial system, we have to have 2 hours of water at almost 200 liters a second to fight a fire for the fire chief. Pressures to make sure everybody has adequate pressure in their shower when they come home at night. System redundancy, and then opportunities to reduce consumption. Next slide, please. So this is the technical end of the water master plan. The information is there. I believe the document itself is available to you online and in your packages. Next slide, please. So what does this all mean? So given we're going to gain we'll have a population of somewhere between 18 and 20,000 people in the next 20 years. So by 2040, it means we need to have around 300 liters a second of water. Right now with Greeley and the golf course well, we only have around 245. So we do need to find more water. The water is available at the golf course wells. So golf course wells have high iron and manganese, which will also mean that we need to treat that chemistry to remove those two chemicals. They make your clothes turn red. And it takes more chlorine to treat water with high iron and manganese. So we want to get rid of that. Next slide. Storage. We have deficiencies right now or in the future for Highway 1 Reservoir and Arrow Heights reservoirs. These can be remedied with a new reservoir to service the Johnson Heights area, which is a future development area, and RMR, which will be building a reservoir someplace above their base area, and it could be potentially be even at Revelation Lodge. So they will build that for the city, which will then become a city asset. So it has no net cost to us. Next slide. Thank you. So fire flows and pressures. We have areas in town, approximately 21 areas where we need to have improvements to provide a higher level of fire protection to the community. Those will be remedied with pipe work, upsizing pipe, replacing pipe, and upsizing distribution pipe. So those are all in the back of that report. And all of these tables in the back talk to the pipe systems that we have and the allocation of money that is needed to upsize. Councilor.
Just curious as in regards to fire flows and pressure, what about the use of just like drafting operations for fire operations? So basically big submerged tank where you draft the water out of it. You know, you can put it low enough down. I think the drafting for Class A pupper is like 14 feet.
For a cistern system.
Yes.
Unfortunately, our fire department cannot rely on that for the duration that you need in order to provide that 2 hour of 200 liters for an industrial site.
Okay.
For a site that perhaps is not on the water system, but that's on a well, that would be an optimal solution for a resident.
That's typically where we see it as like rural residential, kind of agricultural farmland.
For city, single family homes, the requirement is only 80 liters a second for 2 hours, roughly a third, right? But it's still a lot of water. And so that's why we need to ensure that our pipes are of adequate size. We have certain areas of town that are 2-inch or galvanized steel, and our minimum size is 4-inch.
Mm-hmm.
And so those were all done many, many years ago. So we can fix this. Next slide, please. So what do we need to build in the future? I need to build another well at the golf course and a treatment plant, Johnson Heights Reservoir and pumps, because unfortunately gravity will not work from Greeley. Too much pipe loss to get there, so we can't actually fill a reservoir at Johnson Heights. So we will have to pump from Greeley. There are pumps there, they're decommissioned. We can make that happen. This is likely a development cost charge project, as there is no development up there that requires this service right now. The rest of the community should not be on the hook for building something like that for future residents. So this is a tool that will also help inform that DCC discussion. And lastly, as described, we've got a PRV here at Nickel Road. And all of this is future RMR construction that they will build for us and transfer to the city. Again, no cost to us, but that will provide supplemental water to the resort base area. That will also provide cascading water that we can use from RMR Reservoir to the Arrow Heights Reservoir, which will then protect Arrow Heights area. The PRV at Nickel will allow us to get adequate fire flow down to the hospital, which is right now inadequate. And that's a capital project for this year. Next slide, please. So we've also got this 450 millimeter main from Greeley. We need to upsize it to a 500. The capital cost is quite significant. However, it's absolutely needed for our future, as it is currently our main and significant source of water. If we lost it, it would be a huge impact to the community. And I'm not even sure that we could repair it very quickly. If it was a large tourist weekend or visitation weekend, it would be detrimental significantly to the community. So we have already considered budgeting this stuff for your consideration in the budget currently. Next slide, please. Other things that we need to do. Our bylaws are, as you heard earlier regarding our zoning bylaw, everything seems to be needing to be updated. Right now, our subdivision and servicing bylaw allocates, demands that anybody that comes in with a new development project utilize 1,200 liters per person per day as our maximum. Let me start over again, sorry. Currently, we have 900 liters per person per capita per day is in our bylaw. Using all of the information that we have about Greeley, how much water we treat, we've actually figured out that we're using on the order of 500 to 600 liters per day, which is consistent with other agencies typical to a resort community like this. Whistler actually uses a lesser number, but being conservative, we did not want to go and assume that 500 or less would be optimal for now, especially since we don't have a water metering system in place. Should council direct staff to push in that direction, that would be beneficial. So we do need to update our subdivision and servicing bylaw. And one other, metering. Next slide, please. Oh, I skipped one slide. Last item recommended in this report is to initiate water metering for ICI businesses. So that's industrial, commercial, and institutional. The report recommends that we implement this as soon as we can, and likely we can save upwards of 5% of our usage per year as soon as that is done. In addition, it would allow billing of people using the water that they're actually using instead of getting a flat rate. It's typical throughout North America, and it's something the city should pursue. And that is a 10-minute summary of a $150,000 study that's going to cost in the next 20 years close to $30 million to implement.
Well, small dollars. Any questions for Mr. Black?
Again, it's a big tool for us. It provides the real knowledge that we need for the long term. So we are not guessing on these things. We know when they need to be done. Development occurs faster. We have to build it faster, but the DCC should be pulling that money in. Development occurs slower, then we don't need things soon, so we don't have to rush. It'll all be dependent on the economy.
Councilor Stigners.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, just a quick question regarding the ICI. I'd like to hear your thoughts on, expanding that to new development.
Thank you, Councilor, and through your worship, to Councilor Stigners. We do require all new construction to install a meter, including commercial, industrial, institutional,
Okay.
and multifamily homes, so that when we are ready to initiate it, we don't have to go and hit for the people that have been building in the last 5 years.
Okay. And multifamily being anything like two or more?
Two or more.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Councilor Orlando.
Yeah, your worship, thank you, through your worship to Director Black. I guess one of the questions I wanted to ask is, in the past, the city has commissioned engineering studies of the water system, and speaking directly to the question of metering, the result, and this is going back, 8 or 10 years, was that one of the big issues is water loss in the ground because we have alluvial deposits, and it's easy for the water to just escape and disappear and be in the river, and no one knows we're losing a lot in different places. So one of the remedies was districting or various metering systems such as juncture points to try and identify where the issues are. And also, I believe at that point, the recommendation was not to pursue a metering system, especially an individual residential metering system, because the idea was it all boils down to money, and you could find that that lost water through identifying where we're losing it and fixing it that way. So I'm just on that general topic. Now that we've done updated studies, have a better understanding of what's going on. I just was wondering if you could speak to that to help me gain an understanding of sort of that what I perceive to be a bit of a change in direction. Yeah.
Through your worship to Councilor Orlando, I'm glad you brought that up. The study of identified many years ago to identify areas that we were seeing leakage. 2 years ago, we implemented a program to start zoning our water system to see where we were with meters, very accurate meters, so that we can see where usage is occurring when we typically would not see it. And so we've got meters at the bridge, we've got one in up on CP Hill, one at Columbia Park, and we're putting 2 more in down south this year. So we will be able to now start getting a better handle on where we're seeing these losses occur. As you said, we did a study a long time ago, but nothing was done. We're doing that now. It is important that we understand that, and we will conquer that hill as quickly as we can. And council has given the engineering department and public works the trust to implement that program and to start upsizing and replacing and fixing and making sure we have water pressure and fire protection for the community. So those things are underway. I believe that typically the metering programs now, if we set it up as a local area service, $500 for a local meter. If we do that throughout the community over a 20-year cycle, $3 or $4 a year or a month to install a meter, so that it should not be an impact to the municipal budget, but it would be spread amongst everybody, and then everybody would be billed for what they use. As you saw last summer, in the summer before, some neighbors have got really green yards, and we have prohibition against irrigation. How can we do anything about it unless we actually catch that? With meters, we can actually make them pay for what they're using. So, is it something we should pursue? In time. If council's direction is to adopt the master plan as staff is requesting, we would move very quickly towards moving into that ICI to get the larger users, the cement plant, brewery, commercial businesses to pay for what they're really using instead of a flat rate.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Any other questions on the motion on the table or the presentation from Mr. Black? Seeing none, I will now call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? No, motion's carried unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Black.
Thank you very much.
All right, so Ms. Braun, we're going to take a couple minute break before we go into your stuff. We've been at this for a couple hours. So Ms. Russo, if you could just put up the little sign that we're going to take a 5-minute break. Thank you. Okay, Ms. Russo, we are ready to go if you would like to restart.
Yeah.
All right. This is economic opportunity funding request. Someone want to put the first motion on? Ms. Braun, you're okay with me putting the first motion on, or do you have a presentation?
I do have a presentation, Your Worship, but I can give the whole presentation and then we can go through the motions, or I can break it out as you like.
Let's do the presentation, please.
Okay. Can I share the screen, please?
You are free to share this.
You can see my screen. Okay, before
We're watching it, give us a wheel of death. There we go, we've got it up and running.
Okay, before I get into this exact example, I will talk a little bit about the presentation overall, or the initiative overall. So what we have in front of you is a request to the CSRD for access to our Economic Opportunity Fund, which is funded by the Payment in Lieu of Taxes, or the PILT, from the Mica Dam, and is provided to communities affected by the damming of the river that cuts back on their opportunities to pursue economic development, essentially. So our request is for a total of $416,200 in several different categories. And I wanted to give you a bit of a background as to how what are our progress on key objectives as a commission, Economic Development Commission, to bring all of you up to speed. I don't believe this council has heard yet about our Economic Opportunity Fund or the kinds of activities we fund with it. So my report provides a bit of background on some key economic sectors that I'm going to be updating you on, one being tech, one being outdoor recreation, one being arts and culture, and one being transportation. So I'd like to start with the Tech 3.0 initiative, and that is a recommendation to the CSRD for a total of $181,700. And there's three components to our Tech Strategy 3.0. This has been developing over several years. The first iteration was our tech strategy, and then Tech Strategy 2.0, which included the build out of our idea factory and the fabrication lab. So Tech 3.0 has three components. One is to formalize our data dashboard and update it with real-time information. So what you see right now is our prototype that was developed last year. It is being housed currently on our Help Seeker platform, which we use to share social and other economic indicators with the community. And I'll give you just a bit of a sense of the kind of data that we are looking at sharing with the public, with investors, with the business community on our dashboard. So here is the first page that gives you an idea of the kinds of economic indicators we can capture and work with IT to make sure that these are updated in real time. So we've got active business licenses, we've got building permits by type, we've got different kinds of job postings by industry. Another page is transportation and tourism, which shows a growth year over year of our MRDT tax revenues and the portion that goes into our online accommodation platform for affordable housing. We have access to information on major transportation events that impact the community. We have population data broken out by demographic and by visitors. We have housing information broken out by real estate listings online and number of days on record, or on market, sorry, active residential listings, average rental housing costs. We have food security data that captures the number of individuals served at the food bank by number of visits, by age group, and by employment status. So there's other pages as well, but just to give you an idea of what our data dashboard purports to do, it is a real-time data gathering and sharing platform that we have developed a prototype for and are looking to expand and find a home for it, essentially to live on or connected to our city's CED website or a prototype or a microsite of some sort. The second part of our tech strategy is updating that CED website. We need information in one place that pertains to business retention and expansion, investor resources, comprehensive land inventory, linking to development services and their updated website tools for investors and for businesses, and to make sure that it's a one-stop shop for investors or businesses to be able to access information. Right now, we have industry sector profiles housed with Imagine Kootenai. We've got our data dashboard, as I mentioned, housed on the Help Seeker platform. And our CED website, that's part of the city's website, is quite, compared to other communities our size, is fairly woeful in terms of the information that it provides to investors and to businesses. So it's been a long time coming. We've been working on this for a few years, but COVID and our kind of recovery and other infrastructure grants that we were working on over the past few years kind of took a front seat. So the third part of our tech strategy 3.0 is supporting the actual tech sector. So initially, as you've toured our fabrication lab, the Idea Factory was a direct outcome of what the tech sector said they needed in town. Our next iteration speaks to the needs that really were partly defined by COVID, those nomadic digital workers that are moving to town, that are flocking to town and looking for workspace and co-workspace. So we're seeing more and more of these digital nomads working remotely, coming to town, bringing their jobs with them, not requiring a bricks and mortar place of employment necessarily. They want the lifestyle, they can afford to purchase homes here, coming from Toronto or Vancouver. What they are looking for is co-work space. So we have a situation where we have our Idea Factory, which is underutilized at certain hours of the day. We have the CoLab in town, which is overutilized and has a long waiting list. And we're seeking to support the tech sector by meeting that need initially by having some overall administration and coordination of that function to ensure they have access to workspace, to ensure that they have access to grants, ensuring that they identify their needs, that we capture statistically what that sector is doing in town, that we have access to entrepreneurial support through Startup Revelstoke, and as well as our ongoing programming that we provide to youth and adults through our Idea Factory. So in a nutshell, the Tech Strategy 3.0 lays out these three different component pieces in the report, and that comprises the $181,700 we're requesting from the OF. Any questions about the tech strategy before I go on to the next ones? I mean, each of these could be really a report in itself because they're all quite different, but they are focusing on four key sectors that we are trying to support as we transition from forestry and into new areas of the economy post-COVID. So any questions on tech that I can try to answer?
Councillor Stephenhurst.
Not so much a question, sir, but just a comment. I think the information that's provided looks great. I'd love to see this integrated in the future. And I would urge Councillor Orlando to maybe think about that in moving forward with the communication plan, because I could see that this being, a really beneficial tool for any businesses moving to town. So I'd like to see that. Yeah. Thank you.
And through Mayor Schultz to Councillor Stephenhurst, yes, that is actually something that we've raised at management last week, and we're hoping to address the task force. We have initially shared some of the ways we communicate our different projects, but this specifically is where we are moving in the future, and we will be bringing this information to the task force to share, what are the options, what are the different platforms we can look at, and we're also working with IT as well at this point to try and assess what are the different options we have going forward, what are the best platforms to use, that kind of thing. So we're at the very beginning stages of this. The idea is to secure the funds, much like Development Services has secured the funds to update their online resources, and then move forward once we have the funding in place to identify these priorities.
Great. All right, thank you. Any other questions or comments regarding tech? Seeing none, let's move on, Ms. Brown.
Okay, so the second request is to access the EOF to allocate $85,000 for the shuttle service for the 2023-24 period. We've been averaging about $100,000 a year that we're pulling out of EOF for the last 3 years, redirecting some of the funds that have been allocated to the previous flight service, and then moving towards ensuring that the shuttle service is going to be responsive to the needs of hotels, of tourism operators, of the larger community outside the municipality, for instance, providing shuttle service to the resort. And as Director Black moves forward with amalgamating the shuttle service with BC Transit, we're looking to the EOF as a pretty steady source of funds year to year, somewhere in the window of $100,000 to support transportation overall to help us subsidize those services. And it allows us to utilize RMI funds for more of the city capital assets and divert some of the transportation costs to the EOF, which one of the intended uses of the EOF fund is to support transportation logistics. Any questions all about that initiative?
Any comments, questions? Seeing none? No, thank you. Move on.
The third initiative is to support the arts and culture sector with $50,000 for a cultural planning process. This came out of the OCP directly in the Parks and Rec Master Plan as a recommendation that the culture sector needed a plan of their own. It didn't necessarily fit within Parks and Rec. And I've been working with Director Donato to look at how we can co-lead this process. Another way it dovetails with work that's underway right now is the Revelstoke Arts Council is conducting a feasibility study onto creation of a cultural center. So we're working with them, and we see this as being a large, a bigger umbrella to that discussion. So they're looking at specifically creating an arts and culture center in town, and we would see that as being one component to the larger issue of cultural planning as directed by the OCP. We also have a lot of opportunities with our Indigenous partners to ensure that we look at Indigenous tourism opportunities in future, together with Children Revelstoke. So that is what is behind this initiative, and it'll be something that myself and Laurie Donato work together on with our arts and culture sector. I will just add that we are certainly punching above our weight in that sector. It is a driving, it's a driver of our economic development in future, and it complements tourism, much the same way that outdoor recreation does. So any questions about that request specifically?
Any questions, comments? Seeing none? No, thank you.
The last three initiatives are related to the recreation sector, the outdoor rec sector, and these again are larger activities that take place on Crown land outside the city in the CSRD Area B. And we've started to, again, similar as with the ski shuttle, to transition our costs for some of these recreation groups to EOF to free up RMI funds for core city infrastructure projects. So we're looking for $35,000 for the Revelstoke Cycling Association to support their ongoing trail maintenance, $30,000 from the EOF for the Alpine Club to support ongoing trail maintenance of the recreation hiking trails and amenities, which include things like bathrooms, garbage. And then that recommendation as well be made to allocate $34,500 to the Climbers Access Society to support ongoing maintenance of their recreation climbing routes and amenities. So these three activities cannot be funded through RMI funds. RMI funds is for new projects, new initiatives, but the ongoing maintenance is something that we know that Rec Sites and Trails did not have capacity for, and that we are working closely with Rec Sites and Trails. We've consulted with them on these priorities to make sure that these are areas that they see being priorities for the next couple of years in their recreation trail development. I would also add that these three clubs specifically don't have that membership model that supports revenue generation the same way that, say, Nordic or Sledders or Dirt Bikers do. So this is a good use of the funds to support that capacity internally with each group.
Thank you. Any questions or comments regarding trails, Councillor Lucien?
Thank you, Mayor Hills. Is this the first ask from these groups for this funding, or have these groups been given funding in previous years?
The 2 years ago, the RCA obtained $30,000 from the EOF, and the Alpine Club obtained, I think, $25,000. I'm just looking back at my files, but it is the first request for the Climbers Access Society.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any other questions, comments?
Before you make the motion, I do want to just mention quickly that these three outdoor recreation projects support a larger conversation we'll be having in future about backcountry recreation access and planning. So we're going to be coming back to council probably in 2 to 3 months to talk about the next steps of our backcountry recreation access planning project, which would pull these groups together to inform on how we access and utilize our backcountry resources. We're hoping to launch the final version of the study that was conducted with Selkirk College on the state of the backcountry at the upcoming Columbia Institute for Ecological Sustainability's conference in May. And another conversation that fits into this that will be coming back to you probably in March, I'm guessing, is support for the Illecillewaet Greenbelt Society through the EOF for their trail grooming in the winter. So I mentioned it in my report. I did not include it as one of the recommendations until we have a fulsome application for EOF funds from the IGS, but we are working with their board to look at the kinds of things they have to put in place to be able to provide the sustainable winter trail grooming service on the flats. So, for instance, we've had a conversation with their board. We hosted a meeting here 2 weeks ago, and we're looking at how we can support them with their capacity to develop a business plan, to do some membership outreach, to transition the ownership of the actual trail grooming equipment from the individual who's bought them as a volunteer for the community, and to ensure there's other drivers for this machine grooming equipment. And then finally, to make sure that the IGS has liability insurance in place to cover these activities. So this is all in the works right now. We've had conversations with the director for Area B, with Rec Sets and Trails BC, with the Illicit Greenbelt Society, and are working through Director Donato and corporate admin on future opportunities to provide space for them to house some storage facilities. But what is in front of you today is nothing to do with the storage facility. It's simply for the purchase of the equipment and the capacity building for the organization to continue with this valuable service in the community. So although it's not in front of you as a recommendation, I will be returning to council once we have a full EOF application to talk about this further. But I'm happy to hear any concerns or questions you have now so that we can work on this in the background.
Councilor Chair.
Thanks, Your Worship. Through the chair, just a question, Ingrid, Ms. Braun. Is that going to be another master plan document for backcountry access, or?
No, it's outside municipality. So it's really a process that is led by the new Ministry of Lands, Water and Resource Development, Resource Stewardship. And so the province leads that process in collaboration with First Nations. What we're trying to do is show that we can support a community-led process to bring recreation groups together, to share resources, to develop some common protocols, some common vision, and to support the ministry when they do eventually get around to leading some land use planning for our backcountry region. It's a long process. We've been in discussion with various ministry officials and First Nations for a couple of years at least. And what is recommended is that we start with the formation of a recreation alliance modeled on the Shuswap Trail Alliance. So the first step that we took towards that was to commission the State of the Backcountry study from Selkirk College about 1.5 years ago. And we're ready to release the findings of that study, which basically number of different components, basically looks at what are the different uses of the backcountry right now currently, mainly in CSRD Area B. And the second component of that project was to obtain the mapping data and house it on the city's server. So we've worked with GIS and Director Black to ensure that we can house that data and then be able to access and use it with our recreation partners as a tool, basically, for having those discussions about how we access our backcountry.
Basically, I appreciate that.
All right, Councilor Luna.
Your Worship, just a comment. The ministry maintains a whole website where they spell out these processes, so you can go look at where they're doing it elsewhere. It's been a couple of years, and it was a former minister, but I did speak to the relevant minister, and at the time they said, very publicly that their staff was just too busy to be doing everything all over. They have limited capacity, so it's great to see them coming around here. And I think Director Braun is right. What the provincial government wants to see from Revelstoke is us getting people here together to get on the page, to be constructive and work together. And there's just a real great opportunity. I think it's time to do this. And so, yeah, looking forward to it.
And through your worship to Councillor Orlando, the intent of supporting the whole outdoor recreation sector through EOF funds for these small groups is to, that's a carrot, is to bring them together and say, look, we can support you with your ongoing maintenance and your capacity. We want you to be part of a conversation for how we use and access the backcountry. So each of these pieces, whether it's the Greenbelt Society, the RCA, the ACC, the sledders, the dirt bikers, they will have a role in that discussion. And this is where we start, is with the non-motorized recreation groups who don't have a revenue model.
Perfect. All right. Okay, let's get some of these motions on the table. Someone want to put number 1 on for me, Councillor Orlando?
Your Worship, I'll bring it that forward. I move that a recommendation be made to the Columbia Shuswap Regional District Board to allocate $181,700 from the Economic Opportunity Fund, I'll call that EOF from here on in, to the City of Revelstoke to support the development and implementation of the Tech Strategy 3.0 for the period of 2023 to 2025.
Second for the motion, please, Councillor Cherry. Any further discussion on this motion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Motion's carried unanimously. Number 2, please.
Yes, I move that recommendation be made to the CSRD to allocate $85,000 from the EOF to the city of Revelstoke to support the operations of the shuttle service for the period of 2023 to 2024.
Second for the motion, Councillor Cherry. Any further discussion on that? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Number 3.
I'm prepared to make a motion that a recommendation be made to the CSRD to allocate $50,000 from the EOF to the city of Revelstoke to support the cultural planning process.
Second for the motion, Councillor Staples. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Number 4.
I move that a recommendation be made to the CSRD to allocate $35,000 from the EOF to the Revelstoke Cycling Association to support ongoing trail maintenance of recreation, cycling trails and amenities.
Seconder, Councillor Cherry. Any further discussion on that? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Number 5.
Number 5, I move that a recommendation be made to the CSRD to allocate $30,000 from the EOF to the Alpine Club of Canada Columbia Mountains Division to support ongoing trail maintenance of recreation, hiking trails and amenities.
Seconder for the motion, Councillor Devlin. Any further discussion on that motion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Number 6.
And the final one, I move that a recommendation be made to the CSRD to allocate $34,500 from the EOF to the Climbers Access Society to support ongoing maintenance of recreation, climbing routes and amenities.
Seconder for that motion, Councillor Lucero. Any further discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. All right, moving on to correspondence, SILGA resolution, short-term rentals. So there is a resolution to go to SILGA. Who brought that forward? Is it one of our councillors or?
The CAO and the director and Paul Simon.
Okay, yeah. All right.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Mayor. We've been in conversation with some residents. We've been hearing the common theme that's plaguing all municipalities across Canada as we try to grasp the magnitude of STRs and the impact of it. In 2018, there was a resolution forward to SILGA asking the same resolution you see here tonight. And basically it goes to UBCM, and then it was supported to go to the province to work with local governments and give us the tools in the toolbox to address STRs. So this is, once again, Revelstoke taking the lead to remind SILGA members and UBCM that the province did promise to look into it. They tell us they are looking into it, but it's a very complicated piece of legislation. So simply put, we're asking them to disclose addresses, or the platforms, the Airbnbs, the VRBOs, disclose municipal addresses and make sure they have a proper valid business license. And if there's any other assistance you can give us specifically, it talks about other additional enforcement mechanisms to assist us to deal with illegal activity. Please, province, through the Ministry of Municipal Affairs, help us. So with this support, our resolution would go to SILGA, and hopefully the members will approve it. And then, and again, it's just a reminder of the 2018 original resolution.
Comments, questions, Councillor Chair?
I have a quick comment. I'm wondering if it would be prudent to remove the term Airbnb and replace it with online accommodation platforms. One, to stop giving them so much advertisement everywhere. And two, just so that if we're gonna name one, I think we should name many, or use a term that's more encompassing.
I think that's appropriate.
Yeah, thank
you.
you.
Don't need a motion for that. Let's do that. Any other comments, questions? Councillor Staples?
Yeah, I'm not gonna be voting in favor of this. I think if we're gonna be petitioning the Ministry of Municipal Affairs, I think like a problem with the short-term rentals that we keep on focusing on this as a solution to our problem with the housing. We still haven't seen the numbers and what that's actually going to provide to the market. We all know that the city sits on a surplus of land. We don't have any projects before us to actually develop any of those parcels. And if we were going to petition the municipal affairs to do anything, I would look at, improving our infrastructure, continued support for the childcare, clear and concise guidelines for funding for nonprofit and increasing availability of funding for the private sector. We need to get buildings going. And then we also need to look at ways of incentivizing the development in the private sector. I mean, right now with interest rates and all this other stuff, I mean, it's, how many multifamily dwellings have we seen come to the table for development approval process?
Comment noted. Mr. Simon, do you have any comment?
Through your worship, I will note that staff currently have a lot on their plate within the Planning and Development Services Group in particular, and enforcement of short-term rental is an incredibly resource-intensive process. There's some very basic things that are included in this resolution that would certainly put some of the onus and therefore the costs that are currently being borne by the taxpayer of enforcement onto these booking platforms. Specifically, the requirement to ensure that anyone's advertising has a valid business license. The province has extended this requirement to the city of Vancouver, but has failed to extend it to other municipalities, and especially within resort regions. This is something that is incredibly resource intensive for staff. I could certainly make a half full-time role for someone in the department just strictly to be monitoring short-term rental. That's really the magnitude of what we're dealing with here. So what's included in this resolution is, putting the onus on enforcement where it should be, in my view, with booking platforms.
All right. Thanks for your comment. Any other comments from other councillors?
No, sorry, if I may, just to Mr. Simon's point, I'm not really sure why the onus of enforcing short-term rentals is on the Planning and Development Office. I mean, I think personally, I'd like to see them, be approving multifamily dwelling units, building applications. I mean, the short-term rentals, it sounds like a bylaw compliance office issue. So I think that's where it should fall. I don't know why it's falling on that department. I can understand that they're, overworked and understaffed, but such is government life, right?
Mr. Palmer, Councilor Palmer, and then Mr. Simon.
Thank you, Mayor Souls. I'll be voting in support of the motion. Just a couple of comments. I do agree with my fellow councillor on where we need to take a little bit more of a look as to where our priorities of putting staff resources and that kind of thing. I agree. The short-term rental has been one component of the housing. We have a new housing strategy. And then how do we, things that have not been addressed is market housing and those kind of things. So I agree with that. Having said that, this is just one tool that many communities are looking for. And I think it moves it ahead a little bit. It's a resolution that'll go before SILGA and then possibly to UBCM. And it won't be taking any significant staff time here on in. I do applaud staff, taking it, but it was a priority that was established with the previous council. But again, I do agree with the fellow councillor that we need to have a more discussion on how we can look at other solutions, housing solutions, rather than the hyper focus that we've had on short-term rentals, and have actually had quite a bit of success in addressing. So again, I'll be voting in favor of the resolution.
All right, any other comments? I am in agreement. I'm supportive of this as well. This is just another tool. However, I do agree that we need to talk to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and talk about how we can get more housing. And we are going to make some plans for some of that property that we have and find out which properties we can use. Anyway, I'm going to ask someone to put this motion on the table and then a seconder, and then we will vote on it. So if someone want to make that motion, that goes to SILGA. Councillor Devlin, seconded by Councillor Cherry. Any further discussion on this motion going to SILGA? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Note that Councillor Stapenhurst is opposed. Balance of councils in favor. This motion passes. We are going to now move on to the SILGA resolution for fuel pricing, and I'm going to ask who brought that forward. Councillor Orlando, do you want to make comment or you want to move this forward?
I'd be happy to make a comment before moving it forward.
All right.
Your worship. Yeah, so just like the previous item, this is intended to go to SILGA as a resolution, and if it's successful there, go to UBCM. That pathway, this pathway is intentionally designed to lobby provincial government for things that local governments want to see. This is directly related to affordability. Affordability is a big issue for members, and fuel pricing in this community is a part of affordability. So the goal here is to bring fuel prices down in Revelstoke and in other communities. Now, this resolution is linked to an ongoing process that started in 2019 when the provincial government unveiled their Fuel Price Transparency Act. In the paperwork that's attached to this item, you can see links to the website where there's a lot of information, studies, various reports, so you can get up to speed on what the BC Utilities Commission has been doing there. What the intent and design of this resolution is, I've crafted. I spoke with the BCUC representative who checks for duplications. I've been in communications with, UBCM, I should have said. I've also been in communications with BCUC and the ministry to clarify is the intent here is to prompt the provincial government to follow through on what they started with the Fuel Price Transparency Act. That is the intent there. One thing that's really important for me to note is I'm not asking for taxation change at the provincial level. I think that's a non-starter for the provincial government. It's barking up the wrong tree. We're not asking them to change taxation prices specifically, or we're not asking them to reduce the taxation. I believe there's enough room for interpretation in the final clause there to just prompt the provincial government to follow through and take legislative action, which there was some indication they were going to do last spring, but it, for various reasons, has been on hold, including from challenges from various stakeholders in the process. Another thing I'd like to point out is that this is not targeting Revelstoke. This is asking for provincial level action. As are identified in the resolution here, communities like Golden, Revelstoke, Powell River, Sicamous, Whistler, Squamish are a basket of communities that have been facing this endemic higher pricing compared to other communities. For example, Revelstoke does not pay the TransLink tax, which is 18.5% in Metro Vancouver, yet our fuel prices are often higher. So that's, or in the same ballpark as Metro Vancouver. So to me, that shows that we're eating costs for something that we shouldn't be, and I'm hoping to change that. And I guess the last thing I wanted to point out is this is a long process that eventually leads to UBCM in September, if at all successful. And then it goes to provincial government. Who knows what we'll see from provincial government, but in the interim, we're sending a message, I think. The provincial government pays attention to what we're doing here, and hopefully it can lead to some traction in the interim. And that's my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any comments, questions, Councillor Stevens?
I just wanted to thank Councillor Orlando for his tenacity in pursuing this issue. I think, when we look at the cost of living, when we look at housing, when we look at affordability, all of these factors are playing into it. I mean, I think we're all feeling the pinch at the gas pump. So thank you for your efforts, and I fully support this.
All right. Any other comments, questions? I'm supportive of this as well. I've had conversations with BCUC several times over the last few years, and they're putting their head up against the wall because, of course, our big SO companies or petroleum companies are able to get their fuel from another province, so they're not going to tell us what they're paying and how they do it. So we all know that we're getting the shaft every time we fill up. So anyway, someone want to make this motion? Councillor Orlando, you want to make this motion to go to SOGA?
Your worship, I'm prepared to make that motion that this resolution as presented be forwarded to Silva for consideration.
Right. Second for that motion, Councillor Staphenhurst. Any further discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion's carried unanimously. Thank you. All right, moving on to infrastructure program, greenhouse gas reducing composting, we got turned down. And Mr. Black, you spoke about that briefly, but do you want to weigh in and just let us know what we did wrong or didn't do?
Thank you, Your Worship, and to council as a whole. We did get notice last week that we were not successful in our grant application to update and upgrade our garbage collection system to a semi-automated with bear-proof garbage and compost containers. That grant was approximately 2.1 million, and the total project cost was on the order of 2.8 or 2.9 was my recollection. And so as this is a council strategic priority for this election cycle, staff will need some direction to move forward in the near future to implement this, as this is your desire. I will be having a conversation with the province and the reviewers of the grant application next week, and I can return to council shortly thereafter if that's your desire, to let you know what was discussed, what hopefully our shortcomings were, and whether or not there's another intake of applications coming in the near future. Pending those last two items are negative, then we'll need to find an alternative way to implement that collection system in the community. And it is a priority for, I think, many of us.
So if you're gonna have that conversation, bring something back to us, and then at that point, we can weigh in as to what we think we should be doing or what you think we should be doing moving forward. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Black. All right, we're gonna move on to communications, public infrastructure committee minutes. Mr. Palmer, do you want to weigh in with that? And then Mr. Lucio.
Yeah, so it's been a pretty long meeting, so I'll keep it pretty brief right now. Due to a little hiccup, we missed with the chair. We missed a meeting last week, and we're making up for that next Thursday, a week from Thursday. There was a couple of resolutions that are that I think we'll just make sure that they're tweaked a little bit before they're put on the official agenda. But that's I'm pleased with the work that's happening so far. Thank you, Mayor Souls.
Councilor Lucio, any comment?
I think the only thing we talked about that should be brought up is the Safe School project. We talked about addressing the frontage at Arrow Heights and Columbia Park, and addressing how the multi-use pathways tie into the whole network, especially around Columbia Park, but looking to get the frontage of the schools done this year.
All right, good. Thank you for that. Moving on to Public Art Committee, Councilor Cherry.
The Public Art Committee considered Arts Revelstoke request for funding to support the Isabella Corsair statue. Members decided to contribute to this artwork instead of leasing a piece of art this year. The committee also discussed the possibility of adding public art to the existing roundabouts. Staff are going to investigate and report back to the committee at the next meeting.
Great, thank you for that. So a letter of appreciation for the road rescue services. So the board chair of the CSRD has sent a letter out to our fire rescue, thanking them for what they've done. And they've sent that letter as well to all of the road rescue providers in the area. We appreciate that they actually sent it out, because municipalities don't hear these positive things always from the CSRD. So glad to see that. Appreciative of that. Any other comments on that, council? Seeing none, I'm going to ask Ms. Rousseau, do we have any questions from the press?
No questions from the press, Your Worship.
All right, thank you, council. Appreciate your time today. I'm going to ask for a motion to terminate. Councilor Staphenhurst, Councilor Orlando, all those in favor? Motion's carried. This meeting's now terminated. Thank you, Councilor Palmer. All right, we are done.